everyone. So here we are with another interesting area for your research, that is food studies. So we have Dr. Sethulakshmi and Ankita Ganguly as usual to talk to us about this area. Sethu, shall we begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So I think a lot of research is now happening in the area of food studies, isn't it, Ankita? Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Many people, all over the world, people are working in this area.
Right. So it is so deeply connected with our lives.
Yeah.
We all have a special relationship with food studies, even though we might not be scholars in it. Right. So it all obviously involves a lot of ramifications, a lot of variety of interdisciplinary connections. Let us move on into the slide, and Sethu, I welcome you to talk about what is food studies to start with.
So welcome everyone. Welcome to today's session. So today's topic, that is food studies, which is again a very critical and interdisciplinary field that explores food not just as a fuel, but as a cultural, social, and political phenomenon. And this is again a dynamic field that asks bold questions such as what does it mean to eat authentically? And how does food shape, reflect class, race, and gender? And what can a recipe, a dinner table, or even a hunger strike tell us about history and human experience? So, food studies, it moves beyond the kitchen and into the world, into literature, into history, anthropology, and cultural studies. It reveals how meals they become memories, how taste travel across borders, and how every bite can carry the weight of empire, migration, and belonging. So, in other words, it's not just about what we eat, but how, why, where, and with whom. So, so next time when you sit down to eat, ask yourself, what story is this food telling? Because in food studies, every meal is a text and every table, that is a site of meaning. So, yeah.
How wonderful, isn't it, to think
Yeah.
of how we have lived through food studies from the time of our grandmothers and ancestors, what kind of food they ate and how did it define them, what did they not eat, and how was it related to culture and politics and society. I remember my father telling me stories of famine during the British Raj, my grandmother telling me stories of both poverty and deprivation, as well as the ways in which they shared food. It was so different from what it is now in many ways. For example, they used to hang a big banana, what is it called, a whole bunch of bananas on the door, and people who come and pass by, they would all take one banana, and children used to steal the bananas and sell it in the local shop and get some toffees for it.
Yeah.
So many memories associated with food and the fruits. I think in Indian literature, fruits play a very important role. Think of R.K. Narayan and Malgudi days. It is a mind-blowing field, how different kinds of rice are cooked, and also the other side of it, deprivation and poverty also. Such a mine of research topics. So here we have a slide on food studies in the humanities, where food is a text, how it encodes histories, values, and social structures. I'm sure, Ankit, Setu, you would have some insights on these.
Yeah. So it encodes, as ma'am has already said, it encodes histories, values, rituals, and power structures. So again, through food, we gain a lens into the textures of everyday life, its joys, its struggles, its unspoken rules. So we taste migration in a spice, and we see colonialism on a sugar packet. Then, of course, we feel gender roles in the act of serving. So, and class in what is considered as a proper meal. So, food lives on our tongues, but also in our memories, as ma'am discussed with regard to fruits and And of course, but also in our memories, of course, in our bodies and our identities. So it's cultural expression, it's made edible, and it's emotion that is again made visible, and it's affect, which is wrapped in social, in aroma and taste. So food studies, that is again an interdisciplinary field, and it's again an interesting field. So yeah.
And Ankita, you are from West Bengal. That is one area where food culture is so vibrant.
Yes.
Yes. And how do you see the food as related to class, to the different sections of the society, to
Yes.
Dalits, and how is food and privilege related? Can you
So
throw light on that?
yeah, so currently Kolkata has become a very very popular hotspot for food vlogging.
Mm.
Even people from Scotland and England are coming here, and they're going crazy for various fishes, puchka, and local food. So first of all, this idea of making food go digital, and this attraction towards food of the East. So this is one thing that's very interesting. And also, yes, privilege, the idea of how food becomes a weapon of access to various spaces which many are denied. Like if we look at a very sophisticated shopping mall and the food courts there, not everyone can go there. They're selling very high end products, like very expensive coffees that don't even make sense. So again, food is also about privilege, mobility. So that's also very important. And like this is very interesting how previously, currently we have become more attracted towards food of the West. Like we prefer pizza, burger, and pasta more than homemade food. But again, on the contrary, people of the West are coming here and eating puchkas on the streets. So this is something very interesting. And also, in this slide itself, we talked about the idea of ritual. Food as a ritual. So ritual and religion. So food lies at the heart of especially how religion is seen all across India, or all across the world. Especially in case of women, I think food is a very important source for showing piety, because we women especially are very obsessed with fasting. And Caroline Bynum Walker, in her very popular work, Holy Fast and Holy Feast, had said that food is a way to manipulate bodies of women. They fasted, they abstain, they avoid ordinary food only to get a Christian Eucharist. So, food was a ritual for them. It was a way to manipulate their bodies and to go or, move closer towards Christ. So food is a very important part of religion as well, regarding how they use their bodies, how they manipulated their bodies to move closer towards God. The effect which it involves. They fasted, they avoid even water. They didn't drink enough water, they continued fasting. So fasting and manipulation of body is also very important in this area of food studies in religion.
Absolutely fascinating. Wow. Uh, and you mentioned Orientalism. This culinary Orientalism is a field I think some of my students are already working on. How the imperial gaze and the stereotyping of Asian food, etc. There is also counter discourse that emerges in the works of, say, Amy Tan, or then Jhumpa Lahiri or Kiran Desai. There is so
Amitav Ghosh.
Amitav Ghosh, yes. Asian food as a great important motif and a symbol in these ancient Asian writers. How power dynamics, how authenticity. I am thinking of Joy Luck Club. So many books like that, where exoticization of food as well as a resistance. Mistress of Spices, for example, is where food and spices appear as resistance. It's a fascinating area for research. I'm sure everybody is aware of the ecological angles of it also. If you talk about like a Orientalism, think of Amitav Ghosh. There is also eco literature of on food, Native American or Dalit, or ethnic minority groups. If you look at their literatures, that is also a very significant area. Have you read anybody, Banana Yoshimoto's Kitchen? Oh, it is a wonderful text. It's a bestseller where the protagonist is working in a kitchen, and food becomes a very important aspect of the the plot itself. Like that, there are many narratives where food plays a central role. We could all think about that.
When you
Mhm.
talked about food, and I was thinking about food, is how food is sensualized. So there is a
Mm.
very popular movie. I'm sure many of you have watched it. It is called
Good
Ami.
point.
It is called Amish, which means non-vegetarian. It's a movie from Assam, and it shows how a couple, they're in love, and they start feeding each other's flesh unknowingly. I mean, the man doesn't know that her girlfriend is feeding him her flesh. Also, the woman doesn't know. But this flesh eating, draws them together, and I mean, it pulls them closer to each other. They relish eating their meat. And how, food, it is sensualized, and that also cannibalistic aspect, desire, and it is very fascinating. They were eating each other's meat throughout. I mean, it is interesting. Do watch the movie Amish. It's a fantastic movie.
Wow. If that means non-vegetarian, then we should also talk about Han Kang's vegetarian.
Against
Yes.
vegetarian.
Yes. So, Setu, would you like to talk a little bit more about the research questions that you have given here?
Yeah. So, but yeah, again, beyond aesthetics, food becomes a tool, as we already discussed, as a way to construct identities and, of course, to mark boundaries and to reinforce hierarchies. So, again, we had a discussion about how femininity is performed in the kitchen that you can look into. Then, of course, how is race that consumed in the exoticism of ethnic cuisines? Then, how do class lines get drawn through organic labels and fast food chains, how it is divided into like organic food chains and fast food. Like you might be familiar with these terms, organic food chains and fast food chains. So food that doesn't just reflect society, it shapes it. And of course, I wanted to add with regard to it, how we can associate it with memory studies, because it mediates memory. It carries the scent of home. Those who studied in hostels, way they can very much relate to it, how it carry the scent of home. Then of course the silence of loss, then the resilience of survival. So how it can be connected, very well effectively connected with memory studies. Then of course in narratives of migration, displacement and cultural trauma, food often becomes a language for the unspeakable. Ankita, would you like to discuss with us with regard to the Dalit?
Yes. So, when we were talking about the idea of food ethnography, I came across this very interesting topic, that how Dalit food is portrayed in mainstream narratives. Generally, if we take the history of Dalit food, not much has been said about it. But recently, many scholars, many movies have talked about how it creates a space of resistance, cultural assertion, and identity formation. Because the foods of the Dalits, they are very different from the foods which we are accustomed in eating. Their food not only marks their identity and their history of struggle, but it also talks about their resilience towards the oppression that have been meted against them. Now we are not suffering from any famine currently, but we are the since most of us have, okay, so let's put it this way. When there was famine going on, most of us were, used to eating like this, even the roots and tubers and leaves. So, but for the Dalits, lives have been like that always. So it was a kind of systematic thing for them to eat like that, to eat with the minimum. So many movies like Papilio Buddha or the various Dalit autobiographies, they have, focused very exclusively on the food habits and also the food cultures and practices of the Dalit, and how their food is not only very different from the other privileged sections of the society, but how it also talks about the history of struggle, not only against, the capitalist companies and the other oppressors, but yeah, I mean, it shows their cultural assertion as well, site of
Yeah,
resistance.
like in Jhutan by Om Prakash
Hmm.
Valmiki or Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. The very concept of food is so different from what a mainstream society considers food. And on the other side, we have food as a marker of wealth and opulence and
Yes.
affluence. like in The Great Gatsby or The Importance of Being Earnest, where excess of food is like a, to a nauseating level, the waste and excessive consumption is also. That reminds me, talking about excess, there are so many narratives of eating disorders also that we can talk about. I'm quickly reminded of Muriel Sparks' The Comforters, and of course, Margaret Atwood's
Edible woman.
Edible Woman. So many narratives where anorexia nervosa and bulimia are talked about, and that is also to do with gender and class. That's also fascinating. So we have here in the next slide some more research areas, like you were saying, food and identity, food narratives and representation, globalization. That reminds us of topics like food security and food justice related to environmental justice, then memory and embodiment, and food and digital culture. Wow. We have already touched upon this a little bit, but is there anything else that you would like to add, Setu?
With regard to cookbooks, that is again an interesting narrative. That is like we explore literary foodscapes, food memoirs, and of course cookbooks, not just as how-to guides, but as cultural text rich with emotion, history, and ideology. And of course, food tourism, as Ankita already discussed about food tourism that is happening in Kolkata as well. Food tourism transforms tradition that into a spectacle. And again, appropriation, culinary appropriation raises urgent ethical questions. When does fusion become theft? That is again an ethical question. And when is sharing exploitative? So we look into that. We can look into that aspect as well. And food also touches the deepest parts of us through memory and embodiment that we already discussed. And of course, and in the digital age, identity is now plated for public view. Of course, food influencers. Now we are familiar with food influencers, hashtags, and aesthetic feeds that turn meals into messages. And what we post, how we post it. Again, aesthetics, that is again very important when we post food pictures on Instagram and other social media handles. So what we post and how we post it becomes part of our online identity performance. That is again very important when we look into digital narratives as well. Affect cultures, hunger, desire, nostalgia, envy, all these are filtered again and shared. So that is again an interesting area where we can look into.
Yeah, you talk about presentation of food,
Yeah.
food porn, and consumerism. That's again a great major area of how food is fetishized, and how, as you said, desire is connected to it, how aesthetics of food is, that's also an important marker of community practices in history, and also the food genres. There are so many chocolate narratives, chocolate related, wine related narratives, bread related narratives, meat related. Sarah Suleri's Meatless Days and Han Kang's Vegetarian, for example. So vegetarianism, non-vegetarianism, cannibalism, such a variety of genres in food narratives, isn't it? Great. So now let us take a deeper look at interdisciplinary connections, food studies with popular culture, memory studies, and also gender studies. In popular culture, representation of food in film, cook shows, TikTok, food porn, if you look at social media, you can get a wealth of primary sources there. Food as lifestyle branding, some people just do cooking and become famous, and how it becomes their identity and how their culture becomes their marker of certain social status, and how the aesthetics and politics of ethnic food in mainstream media. Only today I was telling my team how there are many people educated and people with PhDs and all going abroad and selling ethnic food and living, just making ethnic food, and it becomes a great livelihood. So there is a counter Orientalism there at work. And food as a site of nostalgia and fantasy and pleasure. Like you said, Ankita, in that movie, food taken to extreme levels, fantasy. And there are many movies like that where through food, excessive eating and perversions related to food. They narrate, some unusual aspects of life and society. So I keep forgetting a filmmaker. There are in film. I long ago in my college days, I watched it in a film festival. So many films are there. I'm sorry, I can't remember it now. So food and popular culture is a very great area. Similarly, like I was saying, food and memory studies. When we travel abroad, and like you were saying, people in hostels and all, diasporic identities are so much related to food, and that too in a multi-sensory way. The color of food, the smell of food, uh, memoirs and oral histories are all archives of culinary memory. As you said, Dalit literature, and also global South. Asia and global South. Ankita, you wanted to say something about global South, I remember.
Yes, so there's a very interesting area of gastroimperialism and transformations in the global south. So it shows how across the decades, the food cultures here, the food practices here have changed after colonialism, especially. So we have not yet been able to come out of that post colonial hangover yet. And we are still hooked to English foods, English breakfast, or
Yeah.
Chinese food, maybe, or Korean food. Very recently, people are going obsessed with Korean food.
Yes.
So how food is evolving for the former colonies of Britain. So that's very fascinating. And also, I think when we talk about food and desire, you can also look at the connection of food with the widows. If you look at any movie like Chokher Bali or various novels or movies like Water, which have talked about the very unfortunate plight of the widows, you will see how they used to suffer from this lack of food. Most of them died from malnutrition because they were denied any protein food. They were not allowed to eat fish or eggs or meat. And if you want to even have a chocolate, you have to hide from people and eat that. So the desire for food in the widows, especially, it's a very sensitive area. So you can just look at that. Many novels are there, many movies which have talked about this, very voluptuous desire for sex and food, how it comes together in widows and how they channel these desires in very ways. You can look at Chokher Wali very popularly in Water, and many other novels are there which very prominently talk about this very unfortunate condition of the not windows, sorry, widows in Banaras. They live in a very unfortunate state, but it's a
True.
very fascinating area. The widows and how they keep on suffering. Even no one is
I know, yes.
interested in their situation. It's very sensitive and very
Ankita is
hapless.
getting passionate about them, like an activist. Yes. That reminds us of how important the deprivation of food, poverty narratives are all related to trauma and post-coloniality also. Famines and, different kinds of food denial are also equally important when we talk about food studies. I am also reminded of the food riots that happened across the world, especially in the West, bread or blood riots, that changed the history of literature also in many ways. They're all very important aspects. And also gender, culinary labor and care work, how food reinforces or resists gender roles. Setu, your turn.
Yeah, so food is not only what we consume, but it also looks into it's often who prepares, who serves, who sacrifices. That is again a question. So, culinary labor, especially in the home, has long been gendered, naturalized as women's work, and rendered invisible. So, in gender studies, we can look into these aspects as well. Who gets to be the cook and who gets to be the chef? So that is again these terms, who gets to be the cook and who gets to be the chef, and who is expected to nourish and at what cost. So culinary labor, that's again an interesting area where you can look upon. And of course, from mothers feeding families to grandmothers preserving heritage, food work is often framed as an act of love. But love is not free. And that is again, and as Bell Hooks and Sylvia Federici, these theorists, they argue domestic labor, including cooking, is a form of emotional and economic labor, often unpaid, undervalued, and feminized. So in literature, we see this in various characters. For example, in Toni Morrison's Beloved, where cooking is both care and control, memory and mourning. So that is again, as Ankita was saying, about how we can connect it with the plight of widows, where we can look into how it can be associated with memory and mourning. Then in this particular work, The Woman Warrior, where Chinese American culinary traditions, they intersect with the constraints of gender and cultural silence. So all these are narratives that you can look upon when you can associate it with gender studies as well. Then it is also about, as we already discussed, about hunger, desire. So these are all areas that you can look upon when we connect it with gender studies. Of course, the kitchen, the space, the spatial dimensions as well. When we look into kitchen as a space, where the sensual, where the intellectual and the domestic, they intersect in this particular space. Then the gender performance.
Now that you mentioned Maxine Hong Kingston,
Yeah.
and I also mentioned Banana Yoshimoto, Japanese, Korean, and as like we said, there is a wealth of, and also we mentioned Amy Tan. So that's a wealth of literature there that has to deal with food. And it is also not very much worked upon.
Yeah.
So people who are searching for research topics can really look into that area. I think Karen Blixen, who wrote Out of Africa, has written Babette's Feast. Karen Blixen, or that's again a colonial connection. So East Orientalist and colonial is a very good area where gender studies also plays. That's a very good area. And you talked about Sylvia Federici's social reproduction theory, Caliban and the Witch. That is a very important work by Federici. It throws a great deal of light on culinary labor and domestic labor. So those are very good ideas. I really like it. And also, like we said, queer readings of hunger, desire, and affect. That is also looks like very important. So now, what are the methodologies in food studies? That is what we are next talking about. We can do textual analysis of memoirs, novels, or cookbooks, or we can do discourse analysis of media texts, including recipes, oral histories and ethnography, archival research. We can do all these majorly are available online also. It just takes a little bit of my text mining and research to find out suitable texts. Please, everyone who is doing research and aspiring to do research, do look into digital humanities, not only as an area for research, but also as a wealth of tools and technologies that you can use in any research area. So mapping culinary histories and food blogs and all that will become very easy once you master digital humanities tools. Please try to look up these areas in the context of food studies and also emerging areas of research. Back to you, Setu.
So these are some of the emerging areas of research, like food justice and global inequality. Then, of course, climate crisis and sustainability. Even though these are broader areas of research, but you can also look upon these narratives and how well it can, because as we already discussed about famine and with regard to the street food.
Poverty also.
Yeah. So all these can be explored. Then, of course, we already discussed about these archives, edible archives. That is again an interesting area, like how we preserve memory through food. So these are all interesting areas where you can look upon.
Wow, so fascinating. And dear friends, you don't have to stick to literature, literary studies or literary sources to do research on food studies. You should go more sociological. That is a very fascinating, not so much worked on area also. So we wish we have inspired some of you into looking up these areas, and we have some key scholars and readings given here for you. You can take a screenshot or something and start reading upon these works. Sarah Tracy's Delicious, A History of Monosodium Glutamate and Umami. Lisa Helke's Exotic Appetites, Ruminations of a Food Adventurer. Michael Twitty's The Cooking Gene. Krishnendu Ray's The Ethnic Restaurateur. Carol Kunihan's and Penny Van Esterik's Food and Culture, a Reader. These are just some basic text that we have here for you. It's again a great area to read up lots more on. So that brings us to the end of this small discussion on food studies. I'm sure we have inspired many to do research in this area. Setu and Ankita?
We hope
One
so.
interesting thing is the last meals of the prisoners before they get hanged. You can look up this area. It is a bit controversial area to talk about, but you can look up the last meals prisoners request for before they get hanged. And there are many official documents on this, that why do they ask for certain foods and why not. It's a very, very interesting area in terms of psychoanalysis and food history of the prisons. So you can look up that area, the last meals of, they are demanded by the prisoners before they're hanged. So you can look that area up.
Wow, trust Ankita to come up with areas that
Blink of an eye.
yeah. So beautiful. So I think this was a great session, Setu.
Yes, we enjoyed, and we hope you guys enjoyed it too.
Yes, lovely. So we'll be back next week. I think we missed a week, but that's okay. They need time to read up.
Yeah.
If we go too fast, also, it's not going to help. So we'll be back next week with another interesting area. Until then, goodbye, everyone. Bye bye for